Now, this morning, I want you to imagine something. Imagine that you are the sole survivor of a shipwreck and have been washed ashore on some deserted island in the Pacific Ocean. At first, you lie there stunned, exhausted, thinking that it must be some horrible dream. But slowly you realize that it is no dream. You pick yourself up with great effort and look far down the beach, hoping to see anything, but you see no sign of life. You turn toward the ocean and search the horizon for a ship, but see nothing. You scan the sky for a plane, but only the clouds pass by. Gradually, it dawns on you that you might never be found. Help may never come. You are absolutely alone. And you've never had any training for this. You've never had any experiences to prepare you for this. And panic begins to rise within you. But you fight it off, knowing you must keep your head if you're going to survive. A day passes, and your terrible hunger leads you to eat some unfamiliar fruit you find on trees near the beach. You don't know if it's poisonous or not, but at this point, you don't care. You don't become ill, though, and actually feel a little stronger. And you begin to think that maybe there's hope after all. You manage to fashion a crude spear out of a sharp stone and a branch and some vines, and soon manage to catch your first fish. You make some crude tools, and you begin to build yourself a shelter. Weeks go by, and now you're good at foraging for food and fishing. Your shelter has become a hut with a bed of woven branches and palm leaves, and you've actually made a simple chair and table. You finally begin to believe that you will live, and you feel pleased with yourself because you have survived. And you are also pleased with what you've managed to build. The small hut, the simple furniture. Little by little, you begin to feel at home on the island, have a routine you follow each day, and no longer search the horizon every morning for a ship. But still, you feel desperately alone, desperately crave to hear the voice of another human being, have anyone to talk to. You've searched the island far and wide, but have discovered no sign of another person. Months go by, years, and even though you are healthy and strong and fill your days with fishing and writing, there are days when you think you cannot stand another minute of it. So alone you feel. And then one morning, you see something which takes your breath away. Footprints. A single set of footprints along the beach. Someone has walked by in the night. And you start shouting at your top of your lungs, "Hello! Hello!" But no answer comes. And then you feel afraid. Who's on the island with you? Who could it be? Savages? Cannibals? Slowly, cautiously, you begin to follow the footprints. They lead you far down the beach and into the jungle. A path opens up before you, and you find yourself in a part of the island where you've never before been. And with both fear and excitement, you follow the path through the thick, dense undergrowth until you see an opening ahead of you. And beyond that, the glimmer of water. Carefully, you approach the clearing and look out. You're not prepared, though, for what you see across a narrow, shallow stretch of water. Another island, and on the island, a palace. A palace! It's made out of the same materials, though, as your small, simple hut. But this structure is grand and beautiful and immense. It looks to have room after room after room. The The outside is decorated with shells and pebbles. There are walks and rock gardens. And nervously you call out, but no one answers. You call out again, louder, but no response comes. You cross the beach, wade through the water, and approach the palace-like structure. At first you think you must have discovered an entire colony of people. One person could not have done all this, you think. But there's only that one set of footprints. You peer in a window, and you see that whoever lives here has built furniture that is stunning in its beauty and craftsmanship. The person has somehow stained the walls with different colors and created drape-like material for the windows. And throughout you see works of art fashioned out of stone and wood and bones. And this just can't be the work of one person, you keep thinking. But that is the only explanation possible. You smell something cooking. Whoever has accomplished all this will soon return. For the first time in 10 years, you will come face to face with another human being. Now, what would you do in such a situation? Would you A, wait for the person to return because you're overjoyed that you found another human being who has survived, and especially someone who is intelligent and creative? B, wait for the person to return, but begin to feel a little intimidated because he or she is obviously much more intelligent and creative and capable than you are. C, wait for the person to return, but begin to think you probably won't like him that much because he or she is obviously something of a show-off, and you've never really liked people like that. D, wait for the person to return, but decide not to invite him or her back to your modest hut for drinks until you've made a few improvements to your shack, like adding a wing or a second story. Wait for the person to return, but begin to feel angry, because obviously this person has had it far too easy in life and has much more than he or she deserves, and has certainly not gone through the troubles you have, and it just isn't fair. F, wait for the person to return, but find yourself thinking that his palace isn't all that great, and the person isn't such a big shot as he might think. And frankly, you feel like telling him that right to his face when he shows up. And anyway, who would want a jerk like that for a friend? Especially someone who would probably think your place is a dump. And how dare he think that your place is a dump? Even though that's exactly how now you think about it. Kind of dumpy. Or G, silently slip back into the jungle and go home. Because after all, being alone for the last 10 years hasn't been all that bad. What would you do? Pick one. So which answer did you select? Did you choose the first answer? The one about being glad you found another human being at last? Oh, really? Sure about that, are you? The fact that the person was obviously much more intelligent and creative and capable than you wouldn't have bothered you at all? You wouldn't have felt the teeniest little bit of jealousy or envy or anger, or thought that, he probably was a jerk and you didn't want to get to know him anyway? You wouldn't have felt the need to go back home and tidy up your little hut before inviting him over? Or felt that your place was beginning to look a little dumpy and maybe you should just meet somewhere on the beach instead? Okay, I believe it. I believe if you're really that sure. But I'm not so sure. Because like it or not, the truth is, what we feel about ourselves, our lives, even God, has much to do with how we compare to others. And how we relate to others has much to do with such comparisons. Whether we feel smarter than, prettier than, stronger than, more importantly, the other person, or at least on the same level. Whether we realize it or not, we're always comparing ourselves to others. And often what we feel about ourselves and our lives and how we relate to others depend on how well we do compare. The source of so much of anger and envy and bitterness are those comparisons. And there's another truth, and that is how important status can be to us. It certainly matters at work. Title, who has the best office, how many windows, all the little perks. All of those things say that somebody's really important, special. And it certainly matters in this city of Atlanta. I mean, what side of town someone lives on, what subdivision someone lives in, what kind of car someone drives, all the symbols, all the quick judgments based on such things. Even among kids, especially among kids, status is so very important. The labels on clothes, the tennis shoes on the feet, the school attended. And among parents too. So you hear parents casually remark to other parents that little Billy, who is 3 months old, happens to be reading at the 12th grade level. And the other parents casually reply that their little Susie scored a 1500 on her first try at the SAT. Susie being 6 months old, of course. Through children even, through families, status is established. There are even those who find status in saying that status doesn't matter to them. They're absolutely so proud of having no status. More than we realize. We compare, we seek status, well, because we want to feel special, of worth. Let others know that we're somebody and not any old body. For some reason, so many of us find it so hard to feel good about ourselves and our lives, simply in terms of who we are, what we are, and even find it hard to enjoy others in terms of who and what they are. Sometimes, more than a few of us prefer our own little island. At least, there are no comparisons. And what brings all this to mind today is the gospel reading. Jesus noticed how guests at the dinner party chose the best seats, the places of honor, wanted to be seen as special people for special status, and how important that was to them. Then he said that there was another way, a very different way, a way we just don't hear much about in today's world, the way of humility, that we humble ourselves, be humble. It is a very different way. Certainly not the way our culture recommends. If you want to survive in this world, if you want to get somewhere, the prevailing wisdom is that, hey, you got to beat the other guy, put yourself forward, sell yourself. Being humble will get you nowhere, this wisdom says. And it's not enough to be the best you have it in you to be. You got to prove yourself. Prove to yourself that you're better than everyone else. Smarter than, more capable than everyone else. And while it's true that, well, that may get us ahead, it's also true is that it's what holds us apart from other people. And often what keeps us from even enjoying ourselves and others. And that's one reason why Jesus advised a different way, so that we can find a little peace with ourselves, some joy, come off our islands, and join the family that's humankind. But what exactly does it mean to be humble? Well, somebody has put it in terms of playing bridge. He writes, being humble is often confused with a gentlemanly self-deprecation. I'm having trouble today with words, the old breath. Anyway, it has to do, we think, with saying that you're not much of a bridge player when you know perfectly well you are. Conscious or otherwise, this form of humility is a form of gamesmanship. Or if you really aren't much of a bridge player, you're apt to be rather proud of yourself for admitting that you're not much of a bridge player. And that kind of humility is a form of low comedy. True humility doesn't consist of thinking ill of yourself, or as much as it is not to think differently about someone else as you do yourself. It's the capacity for being no more and no less pleased when you play your own hand well than when your opponents. To be humble is not to feel the need to tear ourselves down or build ourselves up in the eyes of others. It's simply the capacity to enjoy the gifts and abilities of others and enjoy our own gifts and abilities too, without comparison. It's the capacity to be as glad for another person when he or she does well as we are when we do well. And that's why someone has suggested that you will know when you're talking to a humble person. Because when you talk with that person, you will feel like he or she is taking a real, genuine interest in what you are saying to him or her. Because it's hard to take a real interest in another person, to pay as much attention to someone else as we do to ourselves, to truly listen if we're always comparing and waiting for a chance to build ourselves up in the eyes of others. I guess you could say to be humble is to be pleased with your little hut and how well you did, and be able to visit the fellow who, using the same materials, built a palace, and be genuinely pleased for him. But how do we come to have such capacity? How do we find humility, humble ourselves? Well, honesty is a part of it, of course. Seeing ourselves as we really are before God and others, realizing that we all of us have a long way to go, that we all of us have much that needs forgiving, but realizing too that we have much to be glad about, that God has given us much to be glad about, that we each have special abilities and gifts, and learning to live with ourselves too is a part of it, learning to accept what we're not, learning to enjoy what we are, learning to be at home within ourselves so that others can be at home with us as well, not needing to always compare or think we're in a competition. But more than anything, we become humble when at last we find our status and security in God, trusting that we are very special in the eyes of God, and having that matter most. To do such things is at last to be free from the need to compare, to prove our worth, to always talk about ourselves and our own. Free to be glad in our success and glad for others in their success. Free to actually enjoy ourselves and take a real interest in others and enjoy them. Now, yes, it may not be the best way to survive or get ahead in this world, but it's the only way to be rescued from our lonely little islands and find peace and warmth and gladness in one another, and to truly start living with some joy. Amen.